Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of Arizona NORML. With us, we have Mike Robinette, Director of Southern Arizona NORML, and Tom Dean. Tom Dean is the cannabis attorney. He lives out here in Arizona. He does a lot of work, actually with for the cause, And I'd let I'd like to ask you a couple questions, Tom, if that's all right.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi.
What got you into cannabis in the first place? Way back in the day there, what was it that got you involved and interested in reform?
Well, I guess if you to take it all the way back to the kind of earliest, urging toward cannabis policy reform, it would be, when I was a young guy in high school and had friends who, a lot of cannabis consumers at my high school, and watching them just have get in trouble, be harassed by police or other authority figures for that. And how I thought, it just didn't seem right to me that, and oftentimes it was only because they looked like, they were someone who maybe was a cannabis consumer and were subject to, police harassment and that kind of thing. As I went into college, I started to understand the depth and scope of the war on drugs and the prison industrial complex that grew up around it. That made me realize that this was really one of the fundamental evils of our society. I mean, one of the real sicknesses of our society, if not, in my mind, possibly the greatest sickness, at least on a domestic level, were things like mandatory minimums in the war on drugs, over incarceration, that kind of thing. The fact that we put more people in prison than any other country, both in real numbers and on a per capita basis, that really struck me as being probably the most un-American thing that I could ever imagine. It was shocking to me to find all of that out. And going into then law school, it's when I really was in college when I first began getting involved in activism. Ohio NORML's got a very active chapter in Ohio. Started going to rallies, that kind of thing, and then through law school, I mean, just learning more about the criminal justice system, constitutional law, more history of the drug war, cannabis prohibition. I started to see that. Really, as far as, the war on drugs in and of itself is a terrible thing and has been for decades. It's caused all kinds of social misery and destruction, certainly far greater than what it is that it was supposed to be preventing, especially given the fact that it hasn't really made any dent in the amount of controlled substances that Americans choose to consume. I mean, I suppose if the war on drugs had eliminated drugs or significantly reduced the availability or demand for drugs, then you might have some basis upon which to say, all right, well, it was a high price to pay, but maybe it was worth it. But instead, it's done nothing. It's done nothing. There's been no reduction in demand, no reduction in supply. So the whole thing is a complete waste of money, and worse, a waste of human life and potential, destroying families and the fabric of society. So I looked at the war on drugs, and I had libertarian leanings really, and didn't like any aspect of kind of government coercion or prohibition, that kind of thing. But I couldn't think of any other one focal point that I felt was a more egregious example of kind of wrong think in America, and oppression, and just kind of a evil that we were being forced to live with, than the war on drugs, but more particularly cannabis prohibition. Because out of all those substances, I thought, gee, here's one that's really relatively harmless, certainly far less dangerous than many lawful substances. How many people die from aspirin overdoses every year? How many people died from tobacco or alcohol? So all of these legal substances, not to mention prescription opioids, right? So I realized this is a harmless substance, and people are being persecuted for consuming it having their lives destroyed. And as Jimmy Carter said, who I didn't necessarily think was a great president, but he did have a fair amount of wisdom about him. I don't think he was the greatest executive administrator, but I thought he spoke wisdom when he said that the worst thing about marijuana use is getting caught, and that the penalty for something should never be worse than the crime. That's not how it's supposed to work. If the worst thing about marijuana use is getting caught, then there's something wrong there. And so I decided to kind of laser focus and devote my career to fighting cannabis prohibition the best I could as a criminal defense lawyer and as an activist. And so it wasn't long thereafter that I became legal director at NORML there at their headquarters in Washington, D.C.
Wow. That's a pretty prestigious post there, especially, being newly minted, on the legal side, right? I mean, you had to have been pretty active out there in Ohio, and really focused on helping people on the advocacy stuff, versus, just going after for, what do people say, money? You in this for money?
That was not so much in Ohio. I mean, Ohio was sort of more of a, I only practiced law in Ohio for a couple of years after law school. I moved to Flagstaff, Arizona in 1994. And that's when I really started doing like full on criminal defense in a lot of cannabis cases, and started to see firsthand, not just the statistics of it and not just my own experience and my friends, having issues, right, but firsthand the full weight of the destructive capability of the state, coming down on an individual just because they chose to consume cannabis or sell it or transport it or grow it or whatever. And watching that over and over and over and over, it was just, I just saw the crushing oppression. And that's really what crystallized in my mind that I could think of no better, more important thing for me to do, no greater calling that I could see other than trying to do my best to end marijuana prohibition. And in the meantime, defend people who were being victimized by it.
Well, I appreciate that, Tom, because there's not enough people out there that do the good work like you do, and do it for the right reasons, So, I mean, that's extremely important, and especially in today's society. The thing that I don't understand is, when people go on the attack on something that they don't know and don't understand. And I don't appreciate people going on the attack with you here, Tom. I think you've done all your reactions, that you have done throughout your life and your career have been for the betterment of society and for the people that you are looking to help.
Well, I'm not. It's a labor of love, and I'm not doing it for kudos or pats on the back. I mean, I would have run out of steam a long time ago if that was my driving force. And my dad would always say that, hey, if people aren't talking about you behind your back, then you're really probably not getting much done. So that just seems to be part of the thing. I mean, if you're over target, if you're actually making change happen, then it's gonna rub people the wrong way for different reasons, and that's gonna draw criticism. So I hear now, obviously, I get I'm sure a lot of criticism in prosecutorial agencies, I'm sure. And I even hear it, even in some in the cannabis activist world, I'll actually now and then, and it's usually a couple of voices will be critical, and say things about me that I'm like, wow, that's interesting. I never thought of that, like somehow, and I think, Ryan, I was telling you about how I kind of become used to getting criticized, for a long time now, ever since I was actually in Lyndon LaRouche's newsletter, who was the guy, he ran for president under the Communist Party a few times, and I don't know what it's called, the American Communist Party or whatever it's called. They have a monthly newspaper, and I was featured in an article there where I was in some conspiracy theory because I was legal director at NORML, but also involved in private practice defending, and this was just after I left NORML, defending certain people who were arrested, who were Israeli nationals that were arrested after 9/11 and held briefly. Some people might remember that. And, someone wrote an article and said, well, look, George Soros is known to donate money to these kind of criminal justice reform programs like marijuana decriminalization or legalization. And he's also known to, I don't think anybody these days would suggest that he supports Israel, but, he's a Jewish and that these were Israelis, and drew this connection. I'm reading this article and I kind of forgot it's about me, and I'm reading it and thinking, wow, this is really, they figured out this conspiracy, but of course it was all false. And, but I realized then how that kind of thing, it's easy for that kind of thing to get started. And, you really have to be careful about what you choose to believe. And I look at everything with an eye of skepticism. And I don't take anyone's word for anything. I want to formulate my opinion based on the evidence. And I guess maybe that's me being a lawyer, but
right, the evidence that you see and as you see it, right? Not just taking someone else's word for
right. Imagination. People have great imaginations. Human beings in general have amazing imaginations. We can whip up all kinds of ideas, and with social media, it's easy to put them out there, and they kind of take on a life of their own. And I personally don't, I'm not really speaking. I don't really notice anything out there about me, but just in general, I think as an observation, we human beings have an amazing imagination and potential to create fiction in a very persuasive way, and to have a foundation like social media to kind of spread that, and where it takes on a life of its own. It's really amazing. We've never really been in a situation like this in human history. And I think it's interesting to watch. It's also oftentimes very distracting, and, for some people, which is why I personally avoid social media for the most part, just because I find myself easily drawn into it, and hours later I'm like, what am I doing?
You're down the rabbit hole, right? Down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of your accomplishments and some of the things that you've actually done throughout your career that's helped further legalization. I know you've had some big cases out there. Love to hear some highlights.
Yeah. Over the years, I mean, from starting out, really, as I said, in Flagstaff in 1994, doing a lot of marijuana cases, trials, hearings, I guess nothing of any amazing notoriety, just a lot of, winning trials, winning motions to dismiss, motions to suppress, that kind of thing. But then obviously getting to NORML and having that national platform, the cases I was involved in kind of were, I guess, much more, important on a nationwide sort of basis. When I was there, shortly after I was there, Montana NORML was able to figure out that the University of Montana had a research clinic set up, where, being funded by the federal government, to develop and engineer a new fungus called Fusarium oxysporum, which had been designed to specifically and only consume cannabis. So any plant of the genus cannabis, this thing would eat. And they developed that very carefully. By the time we found out about it, they'd already done a couple field tests in Montana, even one in Beltway, Maryland, outdoor field tests. And they were planning in about 30 days to drop massive amounts of this fungus from an airplane into the Florida Everglades. And this was outrageous, because I thought this is like Jurassic Park was out, and this idea that they had, which was, well, once it eats all the cannabis, it'll just go quietly into that last good night, and we'll never hear anything more of this. It'll just go extinct, rather than, well, wait a minute, life will find a way. Remember that saying from Jurassic Park? And it would, it'll figure out something else to eat. And I thought that was obvious. And I looked into it, and of course they hadn't done the requisite environmental impact study with the EPA. So I quickly filed a complaint, and which they were forced to answer. And of course, there was no way that they were going to be able to pass an environmental impact study. I had massive piles of documents from Congress, from the drug czar's office. They'd been working on this project secretly, knew all about it, and were just really thinking they could just slide it by the American people and not comply with federal environmental regulations. So it was shut down, and obviously they couldn't go forward with Florida. Even the director of the EPA counterpart, the state's environmental agency down in Florida, didn't even know anything about this, and was shocked, obviously, to find out that they were planning on doing this, and joined me in wanting to resist them going forward with that. Last I heard, they ended up setting up shop down in Colombia or something. So I don't know whatever actually happened to that program. I think if you look it up in Colombia, you can still find some reference to those ongoing kind of experiments. But that was a good case, because who knows what would have happened in the Everglades had that stuff been dropped there. And cases like that were fun. Another one was where, incidentally, Keith Stroup, the founder of NORML, who was my boss, was really amazing at issue spotting. He'd call me into his office because we worked right down on Lafayette Park, which is right next to, Farragut Square, which is right next to Lafayette Park. And, he'd call me into his office, and he'd seen something in the paper or something. It was one time, it was there's a salon.com had broken a story about that. They had discovered that the drug czar's office through Congress had established a program whereby television programs of all kinds, comedies, dramas, everything, any kind of program could, if they included anti-marijuana messages in their program content that was approved by the drug czar's office, the Office of Drug Policy, ONDCP, the Office of National Drug Policy Control. That's the drug czar's office. If they could get approval, the drug czar's office would free up required public service announcement time, which was valued in the millions of dollars. These are the things when this has been a public service announcement. The networks don't make any money off of those. They're required to carry a certain number of minutes of those public service announcements. Well, this was their chance to free those up if they put anti-marijuana messages. But the thing of it is that nowhere in the credits did they indicate that these programs, that portions of this program were sponsored by, the Office of National Drug Policy Control or Partnership for a Drug-Free America or whatever. No reference to that, which is obviously in violation of the anti-payola laws that were developed back in the 50s, where record producers were paying radio stations to play not what their listeners most wanted to hear, but pay whatever songs they wanted them to play. And so that was made illegal unless it's only illegal if you don't disclose it. So a radio station could still accept payment to play a particular song, but afterwards they have to say, okay, and that song was paid for by, Columbia Records or something like that. So they didn't do that. I filed a complaint, and this time with the FCC, and the FCC investigated it and agreed that this would be a pay to play, literally pay to play without proper disclosure. So the defense of the ONDCP was that if we put in the credits that portions of the program were paid for by us, then people won't pay any attention to it. It'll lose its whole effect. They won't, it won't be convincing to them. And it's sort of like, well, okay, yeah, but that's kind of the point, is not to pull the wool over the eyes of the people. So if you want to do that, and they didn't want to do that, so this was a multi-million-dollar. You can imagine. I got wheelbarrows full of documents through a FOIA request brought to the office from the White House, and also, a lot of these were documents that were from Congress, and I was up against law firms from New York representing, Fox, Warner Brothers, ABC, NBC, all of that, including, of course, the attorney for the White House, and going up against all these guys, but got the FCC had to say, look, if you can't, this is the equivalent of accepting money. You're freeing up this ad space that's worth millions of dollars. And you're doing that in exchange for them, including programming that you have to approve. It's not like it's even up to them. They have to submit. They had to submit it to the White House first. Here's our program with the anti-marijuana message. They had to approve it, and only then would they get the credit. So it was a clear payola, and we shut that program down as well. So those are kind of a couple fun, stories of my first experiences with being legal director at NORML.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. So you've had some fun times, it sounds like, in the fight for legalization here. So bringing it back over to Prop 207 and what we have on our agenda here, in Arizona, I think Mike has a couple questions that he'd love to bring up, in regards to that.
I actually have one nebulous question, Tom, and then a kind of a focus question. And my nebulous question is this, because you're someone who has a lot of experience legally. From your perspective, Tom, why now is Prop 207 right for Arizona?
Well, I think 207, why now? I think, now I would say it was right, in my view, 20 years ago. Now is because I would say, why is it now is the right time? Because sooner is better than later is the short answer. I think that it's the right initiative, I guess you could say now, because, the industry has sponsored it. And they've included a lot of most of the demands of the consumer community, cannabis consumer community. And those are demands that weren't just pulled out of a hat at random. They were developed years ago, back in 2016. The MPP refused to listen to those ideas. And I think as a consequence, that they failed to pass their 2016 initiative. But there were the same demands that, it was an organization you guys might remember that we had started back in 2015 called the Arizona Cannabis Consumer Coalition, which was made up of leaders of all of the consumer-focused reform organizations, Safer Arizona, Arizona NORML, Phoenix Cannabis Coalition. At that time, AZFMR, you had Stacey Teese's organization. I can't remember what it's called now. It's still going, but a number. Billy Hayes had his organization, RAMP, had Students for a Sensible Drug Policy, Yavapai Cannabis Coalition, a lot of organizations involved in that. And we had came up with these demands that we made then. They were rejected in a very rude and cursory manner, out of hand. Those are the same demands that we made to the ADA and to cannabis. What is it called? Strategies 360, the campaign for Smart and Safe, and they obviously took us seriously this time. And not surprisingly, after what happened in 2016. So I think the reason why this one is right is because it is what we demanded. It didn't go quite as far as I think a lot of us wanted it to, but it went certainly far enough to be something well worth passing and building on in the future.
Great answer, man. Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. And Tom, I have one question that kind of will narrow in on one thing that we're all very supportive of and very excited about, and that's the expungement mechanism in Prop 207. From your legal perspective, Tom, we do hear people say that, well, no, that won't work. Expungement can't work in Arizona. We hear that from a couple of perspectives of people who are not necessarily in favor of 207.
Yeah.
Do you believe that this, even though the language is precedent-setting language relative to expungement in 207, that language will simply not work when 207 is implemented?
Well, I don't know. I guess a couple of points there. First of all, I've never yet heard anyone articulate an explanation as to why they don't think expungement will work in Arizona. I mean, it's thrown out there. I think that there perhaps has been a misunderstanding because, you go online and you look up expungement and then you'll see a lot of attorneys saying, we don't have expungement in Arizona. They're saying we don't currently have expungement in Arizona, and that somehow that's kind of I guess misinterpreted to mean we can't have, we don't have expungement at the moment, meaning we can't have expungement in the future is all I can think of. But the second point is even those lawyers who say that are actually incorrect. We do have expungement already in the state of Arizona. Of course, we have set aside, but that's not what I'm talking about. We actually have expungement. It's just limited to cases where you can convince the court that an individual was wrongfully arrested or charged. So it's a very narrow. But I've utilized it and had records expunged. A couple of years ago in Mojave County, I had a medical marijuana patient who was busted back in 2011. He had a California card, and because the cop, it was like so new, the cop didn't even know the law and arrested him, and he got charged. I got his case dismissed, and years later he came back and said, "Can I get this expunged?" And I looked, I go, "Well, actually, I think we can." And the judge agreed that not that the cop did anything malicious or anything, he was just ignorant, but the point in fact is that he was wrongfully arrested and charged. He shouldn't have been, and so the judge agreed to expunge. So there is an expungement provision already. So anyone who says you can't have expungement in Arizona obviously doesn't understand that we already do. So I think the language is written very well. I know that I wrote the expungement language from previously. I've done in 2016 and in 2018. I sent language over to them, to the drafting committee. I also provided them with language from the Arizona legislature, who was looking at passing an expungement law last year or earlier this year, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, earlier this year. It didn't pass, but I provided that, and so the final version is sort of a combination of what Smart and Safe was doing, what I did, and what the legislature was proposing. And I think it was written very well. It's absolutely going to work. It's perfectly constitutional. And, I think the limitation on it is because what it says is that you can get your conviction expunged if it involved possession of no more than 2.5 ounces of marijuana flower, 12.5 grams of concentrates, 6 plants of cultivation, or paraphernalia used for that. And it also provides that if your case is pending at the time that the 207 takes effect, you can actually have it dismissed. So if your case is pending, don't plead guilty now. Wait until after it's passed and get it dismissed. The only thing that's not clear, it's interesting, is that what about people who have been convicted, but they're still serving their sentence? So they're on probation. Maybe they're even in jail, possibly even prison. I think someone calculated there's 119 people right now in prison for possession of marijuana or possession of concentrates. What about them? Can you get them out of jail? Can you get their probation terminated? Unfortunately, it doesn't specifically address that scenario. It addresses, what if you're already done with your probation and you can get it expunged? What if your case is pending and you haven't pled guilty, you can get it dismissed? But what about if you've been already found guilty and you're serving your sentence? We're going to litigate that. I think there's an argument to say, hey, we can still get their case dismissed after the fact or expunged, in which case that should have the effect of getting them off of probation right away. I think this is what Alistair Adele meant when she said, though, that the Prop 207 is not retroactive. I think she means that she's going to resist or fight people getting off probation, or off of task or out of prison or jail. So we'll see what happens, but that's going to be a fight. I think that particular aspect of it, but I think we have enough to work with that I think we'll succeed in that.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. And I just have one last quick question, because we get this question a lot, and it's really just a perspective on, so Prop 207 passes November 3rd. Governor Ducey then certifies it. Can someone immediately upon the governor's certification of 207, can they put seeds in the ground at that point, or is there a lag?
No, it would be immediately. So there's no license or permit or authorization required for a person to cultivate their plants. Unlike with medical marijuana, for example, you have to apply and receive, you have to become authorized to cultivate. On your card, it has to say authorized to cultivate. Right. Not so under 207. As long as you're 21 years old, you can immediately begin to grow marijuana. You can immediately begin to possess 1 ounce as soon as it's certified by the governor, which will probably be at some point in mid-December, right? Now you would you're not going to be able to buy it from a dispensary right away, because they're going to have to receive a license before they can start selling it. So, so that's going to take you're going to be into like April before you see that happen. But as far as growing your own, immediately.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom.
Can I just do it?
It's important to know, technically, that's not when it passes on November 3rd. Technically, that's still not legal until certified by the governor. That's when it becomes law. So be careful. Wait until the governor certifies it before you engage in that activity. Otherwise, technically, you still be illegal. Although, you wonder, would they really prosecute somebody? I wouldn't put it past. I wouldn't put it past. So yeah, play it safe by law. Wait for December.
Good advice, Tom. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, guys, for your time here this morning. I know we went a little over what we typically do for our live streams here in the AM, but thank you again. Tom, keep on me on that. Yeah. And for expungement, that's something that you're going to be able to help a lot of people with, after.
I'm forming a legal clinic, a nonprofit legal clinic devoted specifically and exclusively to assisting Arizonans and anyone, because you might be in New York, but you're just passing through Arizona and you got busted. Anyone who's interested in having their expungement, having their conviction expunged, I'm going to be devoting that clinic. We're seeking funding right now so that people won't even have to pay me to do it. Hopefully we'll be able to receive that funding and be able to handle that for them without any cost to them. So we're working on that, and you'll check in with me, and I'll be happy to provide more information. I know, Ryan, you and I have talked a little bit about that, and even about Arizona NORML's involvement in kind of in helping with bringing awareness to people for expungement, and also for outreach, just to educate people, as we're doing right now, about 207, what the law is, what the limitations are, what you can and can't do. That's all very important stuff for people to know, because as we've seen with medical marijuana, there's a lot of confusion over the years, some of it rightfully so, and it led to a lot of people being arrested, convicted, and having problems, and we want to avoid that happening. So we want to make sure people know what they can and can't do. And so we should do, I hope that we can do more of these shows to help educate the public and even do some outreaches into the community.
And what's a good contact number for people that need help, need your services? What's the best way?
Yeah, you can call me at 602-635-4990, 602-635-4990, or you can check me out online at attorneyforcannabis.com. That's all spelled out, attorneyforcannabis.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tom. I got your number there, 602-635-4990. So reach out to Tom. Didn't have a chance to get your website in there just yet, but we'll get you on the next one.
Ryan. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Ryan. Good to see you.
No problem. We'll have to have you back for a robust 207 conversation.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right.
Thank you, Tom.
Enjoy the weather out there, Arizona.
Enjoy winter.